May I request guests to move forward to fill the front row because they are working on the front line, so we need to show some respect, perhaps. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, working on the front line. This topic is actually really I can directly relate to because I'm also in the news, but I work in the studio. But you guys are working on the front line, so I'm actually curious to hear your experience and where are we heading. You know, when we're covering. Events or bringing stories from the front line. And I know that the landscape has changed, so I'll be very curious to hear more from Philip, who'll be moderating the session with Kun Jonathan Miller and Hathairat Phaholtap ครับผม Please give them a big round of applause.
Yeah, thank you, Varun, and thanks to everyone who's here, and to Narissa and BangkokEdge for again all her team there putting on this great festival. I'm particularly grateful, I will introduce them in a second, to Jonathan and Hathairat for joining us at such short notice. This is a panel that was not supposed to be happening until a few days ago. I was supposed to be interviewing Anna Fifield about her wonderful book on Kim Jong-un, but her day job is that she's the Washington Post Beijing correspondent, and her coverage of coronavirus intervened, and she's had to stay in Beijing. So we've put this together hastily, and I'm very grateful for these two folks for joining us. Hathairat, or Wist, as we're happily calling you this evening.
You can call me just Wiz because we are friends, right? I think for Thai people, they feel confident when you call nickname. Please just call me Wist.
Okay, just call me Wist. Wist began her career in newspapers in Bangkok in 2002. She joined Matichon, one of obviously the country's leading papers, as a reporter covering politics in 2006, just after one of the previous coups in this country. So a very interesting time, I'm sure, to be covering that beat. She changed medium to broadcasting in 2010, moved to Thai PBS, and sort of carved out a very impressive stint there as an investigative journalist. She focused on issues of public policy, the environment and human rights, and made several in-depth films on the violence in the Deep South. Notable foreign reporting trips included to the Philippines to cover the drugs war and to Bangladesh in 2017 to cover the influx of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar. She has won awards from Amnesty International Thailand and the National Human Rights Commission for her reporting on the South, the Rohingya and women's rights. You took a break from Thai BS, or moved on from Thai BS, and a few months ago returned to the fray, returned to a different sort of frontline as the Thai editor of Isan Record, a great publication covering Thai politics and particularly the Northeast. And for anyone who knows it will know that their views are not exactly always chiming with the views of the Bangkok elites, and so a different frontline, but that's what Wist is doing now. Jonathan was born in Northern Ireland, but raised in Malaysia with missionary parents. He, after studying, his first job was at South Magazine, where I think we have another alumnus in the audience here, covering environmental and development issues. Moved back to Southeast Asia to work for them. Flitted between Southeast Asia and London with jobs at the BBC, culminating with his appointment to be Indochina correspondent based in Phnom Penh. He was the BBC's last Indochina correspondent. Moved with the job to Bangkok in about 95 or 96, which is when we first met, and have known each other ever since. He became an independent filmmaker for a few years and then joined Channel 4 News, where he has been since 2003. He's been a foreign affairs correspondent since that time. Most recently has been with us back in Bangkok as the Asia correspondent. Sadly, we're losing him back to London shortly, but still foreign affairs at Channel 4 News. He's won 4 Royal Television Society Awards, 4 Amnesty International Awards, and in 2018 wrote Duterte Harry, which I can highly commend as an excellent book on the life and times of Rodrigo Duterte, the Philippine president, and there are copies at the back there to be bought and signed. He's covered revolutions, wars, and natural disasters, but also notes sometimes happy stories. Among them, the Thai cave rescue in 2018 and the dramatic rescue of the Chile miners in 2010. By chance, I covered both of those stories too, and would have to say that they were probably the most joyous moments in my reporting career, I'm sure both of us. So those are the introductions.
Hang on. Hello? Not all the introductions, because this, as Philip pointed out, is probably better done as a conversation. And I would like to introduce Mr. Philip Sherwell, who is our moderator tonight and has got as much to say about any of this as the rest of us. So I just want to give you a little thumbnail sketch of Philip's journalistic career. He's born just outside Liverpool. So you can imagine he doesn't support Chelsea. He doesn't support Liverpool either, actually. He supports a very small little football club called Southport FC, which he's obsessed with. So Philip first went into journalism about 104 years ago, like me. His first job was actually at the Liverpool Echo newspaper, which he joined as a cub reporter. He then went to the Telegraph and rose through the ranks, first of all on the Home Affairs desk. And then just after the Berlin Wall came down, he moved to Germany to report on the aftermath of reunification. And he cut his teeth in foreign reporting with the sort of fall of communism at that time. In 1991, he had his first Frontline experience, being sent off at the beginning of those Yugoslav wars to the very first of them in Croatia, and the shelling of Dubrovnik, which started that all off. And then within a year of that or so, he ended up in Bosnia, covering the first year in Bosnia. So that was a pretty full-on experience for him there. And stepping back a little bit from the fray in the Balkans, he came out to Bangkok in '93. And that is, as he says, where we first crossed paths. He's been in foreign affairs land ever since, like me. He's been at the Telegraph as a foreign affairs correspondent on the Sunday Telegraph, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Iraq. He had a pretty traumatic experience covering the civil war in Sierra Leone, which I'm sure we'll get onto at some point this evening. We again crossed paths in 2004 in Darfur, covering the civil war there, which was grim as well. And then he disappeared off to America, where he spent 2 years in DC and another 8 years in New York City. So after all of that, we ended up in 2015 both coming back to Thailand again. Back home again. And we've had a great 4 years back out here. So there, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. Philip Sherwell, journalist.
Thank you. So, why don't we kick this off with, we've kind of talked about careers here, but how we actually got into well, first of all, let me say, Frontline reporting, we are treating this in a broad sense. So it's war corresponding, it's disasters, it's also, political reporting, particularly in a country, where sort of politics is so tendentious. It's your stuff in the Deep South. So please, when we come to questions and when you're sort of bearing in mind how we're talking in a broad sense. But why don't we just, start with how you got into, why don't we start with you, how you got into the Frontline side of this business? I mean, what your motivations were and what led you to where you were.
So, lady first, is it? Okay. So, I thank you to having, hello? So, I steal your microphone now. So thank you to having me here. So I got a call from Johnny like 3 days ago that please come to the talk because a lady who covered the who is in China, so she's just canceled because of the virus. She covering the virus now. Then she passed a chance to me to come to see you here. So that's it. Back to your questions. When I decided to go to the conflict zones or the Deep South, I don't think it's a dangerous area. Since even 15 years ago, a lot of people have been killed. Like now, let me share the number of you. Now, the situation have been occurred 15 years now. 10,651 people got injured, and 4,000 people died, and 10,000 kids are orphans. So that reason brought me to cover the situation down there. And at first, I would say, because of my passion, I want to see as a witness that what happened down there after the wrong policy of after Thaksin Shinawat's policy. So I've been there with my team, cameraman and assistant. We drove a car to the deep south, and then at that time I didn't feel scared at all, because I think that's it's the same country. We can't go anywhere, but in fact, a lot of people were killed. We concerned about that. Then the Thai PBS has a policy that you need to take your team back to the safe place before the nighttime. But one night, I feel when we work on the ground, we just feel I want to know more about the situation at night. So I took I kept working on the ground like until midnight. So two of my colleagues were scared, but I feel that we need to know what how people live it, in the nighttime. If you drive a car on the road, you will see nothing on the road. That was my curious what happened. So back to your question, you asked me that why I need to go, because I think I want to voice their voices. Like not a lot of journalists go to the south. I think I should help voice their voices. When I talk to some rebels, that people call them local army. I talked to since I had been covering that story. I think I interviewed 20 of them. The fact that I found they're just normal people, like my neighbors in my village. They got suffering from the policy from the central, from had been facing the problems so many times since Haji Sulong was disappeared. Haji Sulong was a leader of a group who wants justice back to the deep south. So I just want to help them, and I just want the government look and resolve that problem. That's all.
And Johnny, what was your first where would you say you stepped into the frontline world of?
I've been a journalist for quite a long time before I did.
Right.
Because you sort of have to be ready for it. And in the end, actually, I was pushed by circumstance, by things happening. I can't remember. I think the first time I actually did something which scared the wits out of me was going to Ambon in Indonesia, where people were slicing each other up. Christians and Muslims were fighting, and I remember going across in a speedboat across the bay after we'd landed, and going across to Ambon City and being told by my fixer, who was a Muslim, that he couldn't come on the same speedboat as us across to the city because we had to go in the Christian speedboat because foreigners were Christians. And I said, okay, so I'm a Christian and I have to go in that speedboat. And he said, yeah, so they have to go very fast, and don't be frightened if they weave around a lot, because someone was shot by Muslim snipers from that side this morning. And so that was my first experience of it, of actually frontline stuff. And it wasn't like I got a taste for it. I didn't enjoy it. And afterwards, I remember getting in quite a lot of trouble with my family for having done this. In fact, my daughter's here tonight, and I hope I don't reveal too much. Maybe it's time to leave the room. But you know, it's. I think in our business, you don't. There are very few people who are drawn to it by the danger element. It's more curiosity, really, as Wist says, about what it's like for fellow human beings who suffer at the sharp end of war and repression and then have to leave as refugees or are sitting there suffering in the midst of chaos. And the more I did that, the more I realized I was confronting real people. I mean, this is where truth lies. This is it's sort of addictive because you realize that this is what really matters, and everything else in life feels trivial. You know, to some degree or another, once you've seen what it's like for people who have to flee war, because they are the ones who have been confronted by situations which you hopefully will never have to face, and it makes you treasure what you've got in terms of your freedom and your you know, safety and democracy and all of these things which so many of us take for granted.
Yeah. I think the addictive element, the adrenaline rush, is undoubtedly a sort of compelling part of this. You sort of feel that you are witnessing history. You're hopefully making a sort of reasonable go at some first draft of it, to resort to a somewhat tired cliche. But you are also sort of addicted to that desire to tell people's stories. I mean, I think none of us are like military correspondents who know a lot of stuff about kit, and you know, I was always having to look up what the difference between a brigade and a battalion and a unit was. I mean, that wasn't my interest in going to these places. It was to sort of try and bring out those stories of the people we were seeing. I mean, I was a kind of inadvertent early war correspondent. I moved to Berlin, and it was all about reunification with with West and East Germany unifying and sort of political movements in Eastern Europe post-communism, and then this sort of the first war in Europe in sort of 4 or 5 decades broke out in Yugoslavia, and lots of very inexperienced journalists, because there hadn't been wars to be covering largely. I mean, sort of post the generation who'd been in Vietnam or Indochina were sort of dispatched by their organizations. I was, when I went there as 26, I just can't believe how naive and how ill-prepared media organizations were too. You know, there was no hostile environment training. We weren't issued with flak jackets. It was all very, very amateurish. By the time I returned to it in the late 90s in Kosovo, and then I covered Afghanistan, Iraq, there was starting to be a much sort of greater awareness of the risks that journalists were taking, but it was
when you went down to the
early
Deep
days.
South here, were you trained for what you encountered? Because as you said, I mean, it was an incredibly dangerous place. In fact, far more people have been killed in southern Thailand in the last, 10 years, 15 years, than were killed altogether in Northern Ireland in 30 years. And yet, in Northern Ireland, they're incredibly traumatizing. It's a sort of like it's like a terrible wound that is yet to be healed, and yet this is going on in the country we live in all the time. It's absolutely extraordinary what's going on. When you were covering it, did you get training for how to cope with this?
Yeah. At Thai, working as a Thai PBS, they have they train us. They train us. For me, when I been there, I was like the youngest, but the cameraman must be have 30 years of experience. So because I did is for Thai society, for Thai culture, which means like they always look at girl or women as a weakness, right? So we call cameraman or assistant as a P. They need to take care of me. So for as working as a team, they need to take care of me as their sister. So the assistant, the driver needs to know where should we go, and we need to we train to not follow soldier or authorities because it's quite dangerous. So bombs could be happened if we follow them. So we use television, local car, so it must be safe. And since I had been covering that story, no journalist died. That's what that made me feel, I must be safe when I go to the south.
West, you were telling us earlier that you were talking about working with your team, but your team wasn't always as happy as you to go to the south, and you had to kind of drag them along.
Yeah, but sometimes when I ask my bosses, I want to cover that bombs, please send me to the deep south or send me to that situation. Sometimes when cameraman or assistant are not available, they need to send other people to work with me. But so many men, I'm not criticizing them. They have family, right? They have family to take care. If they die, who gonna take care of their family, right? So I just, okay, boss, I'm go by myself. Just I can do I can, because I got training to take camera by myself. I can use my iPhone, and at that time they got so many tools to me, like an iPad or a camera that's hidden camera, or camera small one with the video one. I said, okay, boss, I volunteer. I want to go by myself. Don't need anyone. I can drive. Okay, I can do everything. But later on, my boss was not allow me to go because I'm working in conflict zones, or the conflict zone. You need to have assistant. You need to have people who work with you, and also sometimes I need to broadcast on the ground too. We need to do satellite. So, which means I cannot do satellite by my own at the time. So, my boss just, okay, just have, at the time they had a meeting that, because Thai PBS has a public broadcasting service, right? We need to produce a story to the people immediately. Then I said, okay, just finish meeting now. I just, I gonna book my flight to go to the south, and just give the name to me, and after that I can hire a driver over there. Just give the name of cameraman to me. I can book the flight for him.
But they did send cameramen and drivers in the end. Yeah. When we were chatting earlier, we were sort of discussing the stresses and challenges this job can entail, and also how you actually sort of forget how many sort of hairy and dodgy moments you've sort of encountered. And I think you were just sort of noting down, Johnny, some of the examples.
Philip asked me earlier, says, you got to sort of, can you tell people about sort of like some of the dodgiest moments? People love to hear about dodgy moments that you've had as a close scrapes and everything. But look, I'll be honest with you. It's a bit of a knob thing to do as a journalist, to sort of brag about things that you've done which are really dangerous. But I decided to have a look at my own sort of past and introspectively, sneakily write down all these things that I'd done. But I won't go through them. But it actually left me quite shocked. All the things that had happened to me, whether being shot at by Syrians, Zimbabweans, or walking through Cambodian Khmer Rouge landmines, or seeing bombs going off in Iraq, or being arrested in various places and deported from others, working undercover, and all these risks that you take. And there are many that just come with the terrain of what you do, which is why you get trained and why there's a growing consciousness about the need to train journalists. I mean, some of it is just basically for insurance reasons. Companies can't get insured until they know that their reporters are properly trained. But it's also really important that you do know what to do when something really bad does happen and people get injured or kidnapped. Or if there's a car crash, something as simple as that. So, you go through a lot of these things. I mean, for me, as I told you, that Ambon experience really early on in my reporting career was a terrifying thing. We actually capsized in a boat 1 mile out at sea during a curfew in the middle of a war zone. and we're left floating around in the water. And we lost all our camera kit. We'd been filming for days. It was an utterly terrifying experience. And the funny things happen as well. I mean, you get death threats sometimes in some of the reporting that you do. It happened to me with Sri Lanka coverage and with the Philippines. The weird thing was that, of course, on social media these days, death threats can be traced. And there was a guy who actually made a death threat against me from the Philippines, who quite clearly worked as a member of staff of a large tourist resort in the island of Cebu. And so I wrote to him and his boss, and I said, this guy is working for your company and sending out death threats to foreign correspondents who report stuff about Duterte. Don't fire him or anything, but you might want to have a word with him that it's probably not the best sort of thing. I got this fulsome apology from the boss of this, or from the guy who ran this resort, but I'm afraid I didn't get any sort of free weekends down in Cebu. But bad stuff does happen, and journalists always have to be aware of the impact that has on them. All of us, we've discussed it, and I'm sure there are other colleagues and friends of ours here tonight who've done stuff which, you have to keep track of just what it's doing to you. And some people self-medicate, some people go off the rails, some people can't cope. There was a colleague of ours who works for the BBC who just last week, very prominent journalist, pulled out. He'd covered the genocide in Rwanda and God knows how many wars over the years, and it had just all come back to bite him in the bum. And he just didn't want to do it anymore. And I think all of us know how that feels. I mean, you had that experience, didn't you, Philip?
I kind of self-withdrew from a lot of the war zone stuff. I'm still absolutely going off to Hong Kong and places around this region. But I'd been going after Afghanistan and Sierra Leone and then Iraq, and I covered the invasion of Iraq, and then I was constantly going back to Iraq afterwards when things were going to complete shit, pardon my language. In 2003, 2004, the insurgency was taking off, and the office's thinking on this was that I was based in London nominally, but I would spend most of my time in a hotel in Bangkok, and was that actually in Baghdad, sorry, yeah, I wish it was Bangkok, in Baghdad, and their logic was, oh, well, the rules of the ground, the rules of the terrain, the rules of, getting around in Baghdad, so we'll just keep sending you, because if we sent other people, they'd have to learn all that and it'd be much more dangerous. And I kind of, by 2004, I was sort of seeing friends go off the rails. They were, self-medicating with booze and other stuff, relationships collapsing. And I kind of thought, this looks like my indefinite future. And I said to the office one time when I was back in London, I don't want to keep going to Iraq. And that was then they said, well, there's this genocide in Darfur, and dispatched me there. And where Johnny was too, and we actually ended up renting a house of horrors because all the scary animals and creepy crawlies in it, while we were based covering the Janjaweed on their rampaging. But I confess I was actually spending a lot of my time on my Hathairat satellite phone talking to our Washington correspondent who was about to quit, and sort of telling him, tip me off first and I'll apply for that job. And Julie had always thought Washington would be death on earth to report from as a sort of hardened, semi-hardened war correspondent. But it was the only way I could sort of step back and get myself out of there. And I'm very glad I did. And I watched Libya and Syria unfold, and lots of friends of mine going to report it. And I thought, good on you, and I'm very glad I'm not there. But I don't think if I'd just been carrying on the same career path, I think I would have carried on doing it, the adrenaline, the excitement. So I kind of really, it was a self-intervention.
But PTSD is now a term which is used around journalists, or among the journalistic community. I mean, you hear it more and more. And at first, people sort of were quite disparaging of it because it was a soft, you're a bit soft if you suffer traumatic stress. But when you see colleagues taking enormous risks, I mean, you just used a term there, which was the hardened foreign correspondent. I don't actually believe there is such a thing. I think the more exposure you have to extreme violence, the more sensitized you become. I mean, you have to be a sociopath to be oblivious to this from a personal level, but also from the impact that it has on other people. And actually, it's the secondary trauma half the time, seeing the suffering of other people that affects you more. I mean, I'm more haunted by the stories of Rohingya refugees that I've met in Bangladesh, or Darfuri refugees who've run away from horrendous things that the Janjaweed did in Darfur, than I am by anything that ever happened to me. I mean, you've presumably had that in South Thailand.
Yeah, and I also been to Bangladesh too. Like after Rohingya fled from Myanmar, like at that time, I feel at that time I just want to cover and report their suffering to the people, for Thai audience. I didn't feel that I got suffering from them too, because I heard their story that my dad was killed and my daughter was raped by blah blah blah. So I just feel that I want to help them. I want to tell Thai people as a neighbor to support them or donate money to them as because we just across the border. So I didn't think their suffering cost me, but later on I found out that after I got back to Bangladesh again for the second time, I feel that I couldn't sleep, and later on I went to a hospital. That why I got this symptom, and my psychologist, I went to a mental health hospital. My psychologist said it's kind of semi-PTSD, but I didn't blame the situation or the story that I covering, because I think I want to voice their voices.
But if you voice their voices,
yeah,
and if you give voice to people who are otherwise voiceless, you are necessarily empathic in your reporting style.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are empathic in your reporting style, it's like if you keep on doing it and keep on doing it and keep on doing it, it's a slow form of poison, like radiation or something, because it gets into your system, and you cannot just keep taking it. And that's why I think people bow out. I think that's why it just becomes too much, because you have to make yourself vulnerable to understand the vulnerabilities of those you report on. Yeah. I've certainly felt that, and sometimes it just feels like, boof, you hit the buffers and you can't keep on doing it. And so that's why Philip and I both have had this fantastic experience of having done all this terrible stuff in awful places, only to cover wonderful stories like the rescue of the Chile miners and the rescue of those children from the cave up in Mesot. I mean, that was the most euphoric reporting experience of my life.
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
So I do agree with you, but I think I told myself that that's what the price that I need to pay. But later on, I found out that if I was not there, who gonna help them? No Thai journalists been there. I shouldn't say that. Not a lot of Thai journalists been there to help them. If I didn't go there, who gonna be there, right? So I just told myself, and that's why that was the reason that I decided to take a break from Thai PBS on the end of 2018. Then after that, I spoiled myself by reading books and travel. So after I took care of myself, I found out that my stress is reducing. It's much better than a year ago. So I would say, if I don't know the foreigner correspondent has kind of this center or not, but I already asked a Thai association that you should set up a center for journalists who cover conflict zone or conflict situation, like for example 2010. You know, who can how I can say that? Okay, who expected we gonna saw 100 people die on the street in the central of the country. So after we saw that, we just human being. How did we feel as a journalist who covered that situation for, like, had been covering that situation for a year, and who knows it's not gonna happen again? Like, I don't think that situation was the last one in this country. So I asked her for Thai association that you should have that. You should set up the center, have a psychologist to work with us, and listen to us, and journalists can release their pain. Because we just, you know, we human, right?
Yeah, but you think, I just want to ask Philip a question here about this, because I mean, one of the things about journalism is we value impartiality and objectivity. And sometimes that is translated into detachment. As a reporter, you've got to stand back and look, you're not part of the action, you're separate, you're a journalist. Do you feel that it's necessary for accurate, objective reporting to be detached, or to what degree do you inject yourself into the story, not in terms of just I, but just sort of like experientially?
I don't think there is detachment in those situations. I mean, you try to find balance. You try to be, reasonable in your wording, but to be detached when you're sort of seeing people having their arms cut off in Sierra Leone, or the various sort of.
What can you tell us what happened in Sierra Leone?
Well, I don't know. The civil war in the late 90s was just a particularly vicious civil war, and the Brits sort of took quite a strong interest in the peacekeeping force there. So it was a sort of major British story for quite a long time. And the RUF rebels, who were sort of backed by Charles Taylor in Liberia, their speciality was to sort of go into villages at night that were suspected of being, which were sort of probably sort of government village supporting areas by day, but which the army would pull out of at night. The rebels would go in there and they would sort of give the people in the village a choice of long arm or short arm, which was whether they were going to cut off at the elbow or cut off at the, the top of the arm. And one day, completely inadvertently, I was with Marie Colvin, who many of you will know, the late, sadly, Marie Colvin of the Sunday Times, who died in Syria. And we were out just on a trip, sort of where the driver was sort of saying, "Oh, there's been some rebel activity." We'd said, "Yeah, that's right." We'd said, "Take us somewhere sort of kind of close to where the rebels are, but whoa, not too close." And we ended up way too close, and we went into a village where the rebels had been in the night before, and there were people in this basic clinic with these heroic sort of doctors who were having their lives threatened day and night, who were sewing them up with, with just thread and giving them an aspirin. And you can't, I don't think, when you've seen that, when you report on that, detachment is very difficult. I mean, yes, you try not to sort of over egg it, but you can't sort of say, there's, he said, she said, that there's, two sides to this. I mean, when you see evil like that, you don't pursue detachment.
So my colleague Lindsay Hilsum at Channel 4 News wrote the biography of Marie Colvin called In Extremis. It's really good. It's a shocking read, but she went on to report loads of conflicts and took exceptional risks. And the final risk that she took, going into Homs in Syria, to report in just ridiculously risky situations, it was broadly questioned as to the wisdom of allowing her to do this because she was so traumatized.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of I wasn't working for the Sunday Times then, I am now, but there's been a lot of internal debate at the Sunday Times and more broadly about whether she should have been there. Marie Colvin was a force of nature. She was a dear, dear friend. She was not the sort of person who would take no for an answer. So she had gone out of Syria, pulled out, and sort of went back in. How much blind eyes were turned by bosses in London because they sort of thought, well, she's an award-winning journalist and she'll produce great coverage and she knows what she's doing. How much she was, encouraged to go. But Marie would have been a very difficult person to tell not to go. In amongst all these horrors, and I'm going to come on to questions, but there are these sort of crazy moments of levity. And on that same trip with Marie, we went to another village, and the fixers, and we really should be paying tribute to fixers who are journalist assistants, who are the geniuses who keep us on the road in all these places, sort of said, you've got about 10 minutes before we have to get out of town and go back to Freetown because it's not going to be safe after this. So we said, take us to the police chief, and we got to the police chief and sort of said, has anything terrible happened here recently? And the police chief said, yes, we've arrested this man. He beat his wife to death. And I am not going to try a sort of bad African accent, but it was a Sierra Leonean accent. And Marie, lovely American Marie, said, he bit his wife to death, as not beat. And
this is a moment of levity?
This is the moment of levity. And the police chief goes, no. He beat her to death. And Marie goes, oh, thank God, after what we've seen today, I thought he bit her to death. And this bewildered police chief, so it's sick levity, and, pardon me bearing with it, but what I'm trying to do is give you an idea of this sort of cabin fever, sort of crazy situation you get into, where it was a relief that he only beat her to death and didn't bite her to death, because we'd seen people with their arms chopped off and such brutality and horror that this did seem like this sort of moment of levity. And Marie literally says, that's okay, then we have to go. And you can sort of see this horrified police chief who would rightly think that this was, who were these lunatics / uncaring souls. And, off we drove and made it back to Freetown before the curfew. So, yeah, that's as good as the levity goes.
The dark humour does get you through in these situations. But, I mean, it does sound very morose, what we've been talking about, but it is a lot of fun being a journalist out on the road. And there's tremendous camaraderie. And I think the friendships and relationships which build up when you have teams working together in incredibly difficult circumstances, be they wars or natural disasters, is something which I have just absolutely loved over the years. I mean, you get very, very close to people, and the trust and the friendship, and you put your life in their hands, and so that there are all sorts of positive things that come off working in this domain.
So we've got 15 minutes to go. Happy to take any questions, or we could continue to witter. Oh, all right. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Right. No time for more wittering. So Varun will, and if we have only got 15 minutes. So brief questions, please.
Yeah. This is a question for Wisit. Is it? Wist. Yep. Okay. You sound incredibly intrepid, and I'm just wondering, there were not very many women doing this, right? And how were you treated or taken seriously or not? Or what kinds of problems did you encounter being one of the few women, and not a Farang woman, a Thai woman, being in the Deep South?
Okay, thank you for your question. Before we joined the panel, we discussed about this topic before. At Thai PBS, I think not a lot of men, want to work with me because they thought I was crazy at that time. Because after I finished covering Bangladesh, I want to go to Rakhine in Myanmar. So that at that time was a forbidden area. No journalists, no Thai journalists been there, and a few of journalists been there. For example, this guy. So he been there, but he has a lot. He need to follow the government, and also Jonathan has been there too. I asked my bosses that please send me there because I want to see what happened in Rakhine. But my bosses said, you need to declare your safety first, and after that you need to find a cameraman who has experience who experience working in conflict zones, but no one want to go with me. So I just, okay, boss, if no one wants to go with me, I can't go with myself and with a fixer. But later on, I found out a fixer in Myanmar, but he said you need to ask a work permit from Burmese embassy. If you cannot have that, we cannot go with you because it's risky area. But later on, no one go with me. I just keep in mind one day I'm gonna be there. But yeah, being as a woman journalist, I think it's not fair. Sorry, guys. I think it's not fair for Thai journalists because one day I want to cover the chaos in the Philippines, the situation in the Philippines, like a rebels something. So I asked my boss, please send me to cover that story. We can have a cameraman and also satellite to go with us to cover that story. But my boss says, I would say, if Thai people here, his name is BangkokEdge, Jantalerlak. Now he is still taking a role as a director of news department. Told me, you are a woman, we cannot send you there. But I did some research that I saw so many women journalists working on the ground at that time. Why I cannot go there? Can you explain? Is you against the gender? I said I can work it because I got training, like working in conflict zones area. I know how to protect myself. And he said, we cannot send you. It's quite risky. But later on, I just give up and then go do some works.
You did it in the end.
Yeah.
No, I could not make it. I could not make it. Just they just used some footage from maybe from Reuters or from maybe BBC. No, it's in the Philippines. Yeah, in Mindanao or something. Yeah, at that time. It's like 4 years ago. It's quite chaos area, like a rifle everywhere.
I think, yeah, Mindanao is a bit dodgy for everybody, but yeah. Anyway, next question.
Hi there. Thanks for a really interesting discussion. I guess this question is for whoever wants to take it. You mentioned the importance of sort of balance in journalism. Of course, a key aspect is sort of speaking both sides. But we're kind of in this age now where politicians are telling sort of barefaced lies a lot. And I just wonder how you kind of think that should be approached from the journalist point of view. Should we be offering both viewpoints, or should we really be calling out kind of these lies?
I mean, I think you have to cover what you're calling lies, and which undoubtedly often are lies. But I think I would say that for the articles I write, where it is a statement by someone that's clearly a bold-faced lie or an exaggeration or a distortion, then I would probably give much higher prominence to the other side of the argument. I mean, as I say, I'm not going to claim when you're confronted by evil and when you're confronted by lies, I don't think we should be just doing he said, she said. You certainly should, as far as possible, maybe explain the background for the claim that is, clearly ridiculous. But I think you should then quite heavily try and explain why it's complete crap.
I would absolutely agree with that. And, I think, impartial journalism is one thing, and telling both sides. But when you are faced with human rights abuse, in particular, there is only black and white. It's right and wrong, and it's not a sort of neo-colonialist judgment of some white correspondent on some sort of foreign country to say there is a universal standard agreed by the members of the United Nations allowing you to make an impartial judgment as to whether or not that constitutes human rights abuse. So, for example, in the case of Duterte in the Philippines, subject of that book, which Philip was plugging earlier. Thank you, Philip.
Buy it.
You know, I was struck by just how incredibly evil this guy was. And yes, of course, there has to be a semblance of balance in the way I report it. But all I was doing was documenting a succession of horrendous things that this guy had done throughout this long and murderous career, which culminated in his becoming president. And so, you know, it's not like I didn't want to take on board the fact that there might have been two sides to the argument, but confronted by, as what Philip called the evil of it, you know, I didn't see any other way of reporting it than doing what I did.
We'll take a couple more. Why don't we get a couple of questions? Phil Cornwall-Smith.
Okay.
I'm just staging an intervention here. Example of my impartial.
Okay, quick question about death threats. How often do journalists get them? How serious do they tend to be? And if they really are seen as credible, what steps are taken do journalists go around with a minder? Does it effectively end the ability of the journalists to do their job? Are there any cases of where it's been a real story?
I got a few situations, I would say. Working as a investigative journalist, you know, got threatened is normal thing that you need to accept it and learn how to work with that and deal with that. I got threatened in the Deep South and in Songkhla. In the Deep South, occurred at November in 2018. At that time, I covered about disappear people. Like since that the situation happened, 15 years ago. So 12 people were disappearing. So I covered that story, and before I left Narathiwat province, I tried to interview authority in a district. I cannot name the district. So, but at the end, I didn't interview him because he put me in his room, and his staff were sitting next to me, and the main point was he told me that you already took over to the local army. Thai PBS was a terrorist channel. If you cover that story again, you will disappear. At that time, I just feel I want to die. It's just got stressed at the moment. I just want to disappear from that room. I couldn't breathe because I feel like, how can I explain that? Like, because it's like it seemed like he wanted to kill me something. So after that, I called my boss. I report everything to him. He said, "Let that towel. Don't cover that story anymore. Just leave it." But I didn't listen to him because I have another day to interview another person, and I called my source. She was a psychologist at that time. What happened to me? She said, "You need to talk to a doctor because you got something wrong." But another story was quite scary. More than that story. I went to cover about power plant in Songkhla. At that time, it was a conflict area too. Two groups were against each other. My team and my assistant drove to the area that they are trying to build a power plant at the time. One guy, at the time he was a leader of the community. He carried a gun, and I didn't see that. My cameraman told me that he pointed a gun in front of his face. Then and at my assistant, my driver came to me and called me with something wrong. Can you come? And he just showed a gun in front of my eyes and threatened me, go away, don't come to this place again. But as a Thai people at that time, I was shocked and I pray and I why him. And I explained why we need to come to this area. We didn't mean to do anything bad to you. We just want to listen to your voice. But later on, I could interview him. And when the package on air, he called me again. Why you pick this voice? And he said, he talked to me on the phone. Don't even come to this area again. I report this story to my boss again. My boss said, you need to report to a police station. But I didn't do it because I think I'm going to go there again.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
2 more questions, great. Okay.
You pick.
The lady in the front.
Okay, and the other one?
And the lady there.
Okay,
Was there any other hands? I think that was the last 2.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mike's with me? Oh, okay. So your job is obviously, subjecting yourself to danger, and it's life-threatening all the time. So is there a standard or a moment, or how do you judge whether, to stop, besides the fact? Because, there's always that moment where, what if you went a little bit closer, or if you, questioned more people, you would get more of the story. And so, how do you safeguard yourself?
Yeah, I know we're short time. So, that's also the competitiveness of journalism is such that even if you're working with all your sort of friends on a story from other papers or media organizations, you still want to get something new and different. And there's still that tendency to sort of go one step further down the road. Again, sort of Sierra Leone, there was always this sort of desire to go one step further from Freetown until a wonderful Reuters journalist called Kurt Schork, who'd survived the whole Bosnian Civil War, and 2 other journalists were sort of shot dead at a gunpoint by 12-year-old kids off their face on Alco-Pops, at which stage you realise this is absolutely ridiculous. Why are we just going one step further into a country that people don't know, one town from another? But yeah, that sort of desire to push yourself further and go further can be. It's good if you're working in a group. It's good if you have a sort of sensible local fixture. It's good to talk about what you're doing, but you do have to sort of rein yourself in, and it can be a major challenge. And I will leave the last question to.
Can I have the last question?
This lady has
okay.
Okay. The last question, because I'm from China, so I also know some journalists. They have a difficult time in China. So it's not easy being journalist in China comparing in other country. We have very strict limitation for journalists to have a free visit, free interview. So just want to know, do you have any experience, or have you met any journalists who work in China?
Foreign correspondents?
Yeah,
or Chinese journalists?
Foreigners, because Chinese maybe is easier, but also for foreigners who work in China.
It's increasingly restrictive. I mean, Anna Fifield, who should have been coming here, the Beijing correspondent for the Washington Post, I was talking to her about this recently. We were both in Taiwan covering the elections, and she was saying that, sort of 2 or 3 years ago, you could travel with your sort of local assistant, and you could sort of go quite widely around the country, and you could kind of do some interviews on the side, and not everything was officially cleared. Now, the moment they turn up in any small town anywhere, the local local security bureau reports it to the hotel reports it to the local security bureau, reports it to the provincial security bureau, reports it back to Beijing. And the other thing is that the penalties for speaking to journalists now, for Chinese people are very considerable, and even their sort of experts at think tanks and people who are sort of semi-official and semi-approved to speak to media have dried up on them. So it's a very frustrating time for foreign journalists. But at the end of the day, and again, we haven't got time to discuss this, Johnny and I, we're foreign correspondents going back to our home countries or have that option, or we may be living here, but there's always a get-out clause normally. Wist, when she's reporting here, this is her country. For the people who are Chinese journalists, that is their country. So we have it easy compared to local journalists.
We have it easy, but also there is a responsibility that comes with being a foreign correspondent. Well, we recognise how incredibly difficult it is for Chinese journalists, for Filipino journalists, for Thai journalists to do their jobs in their own country, and how risky it is to have a gun put in your face as a female journalist in this country. Must be a terrifying thing. We don't have to suffer that. We get threats, but not like that. And the problem we've got, 15, 20 years ago, I twice went into China undercover, and it was fine. And I've reported from China in the past as a foreign correspondent, getting accreditation as well, officially. Now, though, it's impossible. Unless you are an accredited correspondent with a newspaper or television station with a bureau in Beijing or Shanghai, you cannot do that. The only place in China that you can go into is Hong Kong. And for me to go into China, I need a sponsor. I need to get somebody who might be another journalist, who might work for a company, who might be a diplomat, to sponsor me and say, we'll take responsibility for Jonathan Miller coming into the country. Now, that's fine if I was going to do fluffy stories, but I'm not. I need to do human rights stories. I need to do Xinjiang, where terrible things are happening. I need to do Tibet, where terrible things are. I need to do human rights lawyers being arrested. I can't go to China and not do those stories. But if I do those stories, the people I work with and who sponsor me get in trouble. So it's a predicament which there is no answer to.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a sort of fun talking about this not always very fun subject and line of work that we have chosen and pursued. But appreciate the questions, and thank you very much again to Jonathan and Wist for joining us at such short notice and stepping in. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator Phil.
Give all of them a big round of applause, and we apologize for a time constraint, and I'm sure you'll still hang around for take a few more questions on the floor.
And Johnny will be available for questions while he's signing the books that you're going to be buying.
All right.
And now I'm going to...
Thank you so much, the three of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. ขอบคุณค่ะ
ขอบคุณครับขอบคุณครับ And that wraps up the talk sessions of the Bangkok Edge. We look forward to seeing you and welcoming you back to the next Bangkok Edge, the Ideas Festival. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. สวัสดีครับ